What's up, Gromies? Welcome to AROYA Office Hours episode 144, your one-stop shop for cannabis cultivation education. I'm Cian, joined by our Director of Applied Technology, Jason Van Leuven. And today our special guest for the day is Cory Desloge, the Director of Cultivation at Harbor House Collective in Chelsea, Massachusetts. How's everyone doing? And for any viewers today, we are not live today, unfortunately, so our live comments will have to wait till the next episode. Cory, how about you get us started out today telling us a little bit about who you are and what Harbor House is and what makes you guys a little different than the rest?
So my name's Cory Desloge. Sorry, I had to toss that in there. The S is silent, but so yeah, I work at Harbor House Collective. I've been growing weed commercially in the legal markets for about 15 years now. Harbor House was kind of a passion project that started in 2018 by a group of friends. It took a long time to get the license to market, or at least the approval. And then in 2021, they reached out to me while I was working in Oklahoma and said, "Hey, we have a facility. A couple people that they had worked with prior kind of oversold and underdelivered on the cultivation side of things. So yeah, they brought me in to help get the building up to snuff and be a productive building. But yeah, I've worked with a lot of different companies over the past 15 years. I guess some of the notable ones have been 710 Labs, based out of Colorado. I was there when they relaunched and rerun. We relaunched solventless lines. And then I worked with a group called Zion Farms out of Nashville, based in Southern Colorado, and then Great Spirits is out of Oklahoma. But yeah, it's been a fun ride. I got introduced to AROYA actually back in 2019, I believe it was, or 2018, when we were in Nashville. Must have been 2019. Back when we just had the handheld sensors that kind of looked like a Blue Lab meter. I forget what it's called. Jason, do you remember what those were called?
Are you talking about
Like the spot checker,
Yeah,
like the EOS.
the Pro Check, man.
Yeah, the Pro Check. Yeah. Um,
Uh,
but no, it was good, and that's it. Ever since I started looking at it through the data side, through irrigation and actual using sensors, it's kind of like a drug. I just got addicted to it, and wanted to learn how I could be better at doing everything that the sensors were telling me I needed to do, as well as understanding my system and its faults through sensors and stuff. But yeah, that's kind of the long and short of it.
Cory's been he's been a long time friend of the AROYA crew. It seems like, I don't know. I'm pretty sure I met up with you in like 19 or 20, and
Hmm.
and right off the bat, Cory's like little Google image was a WR450 motorcycle, and I was like, oh man, I got one of those. And I don't know, it was like within 10 minutes of meeting each other, we were right on the same page, and yeah, helping you out at the Standard OK there, and I've learned a lot from you as well. So just really thankful to have such wonderful people in the industry like you.
Thank you. Yeah, dirt bikes. It's a great bonding point. But yeah, no, it's been fun here at Harbor House. Originally, they were using Canna nutrients, which grows great weed. Canna is definitely a line of fertilizer that's kind of stood the test of time. Um, but it is quite expensive, and I feel they were doing batch mixing all by hand watering everything, and we're just under 400 lights, and we didn't even have 11 growers. We were at like 6 or 7 growers. So one of the first things that I needed to install was a new injection system, converted to a more conventional fertilizer, and then a Roya. Just so I had some optics and ability to understand what was going on once we got the irrigation set up and able to actually run this facility with insight and be a bit more efficient. But yeah, no, it's this whole facility's kind of over the past 3 years has really changed for the better and allowed us to really continue to put out good product. And a lot of it definitely has been with the help of Arroya and the advice and advisors that you guys give to help us get to where we need to be.
It's one of those interesting things that we talk about quite a bit. It seems like it pops up every few episodes. Or a lot of people, they're somewhat resistant to investing in the right tools. but really having the right tools lets you take better care of your plants. Having those insights, giving yourself more time. So by automating, your batch tanks or your irrigation, any of that stuff, you actually get more time to spend with the plants. The better that you can capture that data, the better that you can build a repeatable process, the more time that you can invest in refining some of those processes and playing around with genetics, the fun stuff that growers really like to do. I used to think about AROYA as like the EKG for the root zone, right? The electrocardiograph, where hey, we got the heartbeat on what's going on with the irrigation system because we have those insights into the root zone.
Totally. And I feel myself, I'm guilty of it. When I first started growing, I feel like it's some of the best weed I've ever grew, but it's because of my time in the garden and having to hand water and do all those things. But I feel like whether you're, at 1 light to 500 lights or bigger, having automation and insight only helps you become a better grower. And just like us, plants want to be fed at the same time every day with a very precise dose of food. And when you're hand watering 400 plants, it's impossible to water every plant at the same time if you're doing it by hand. So I feel, again, whether it's 1 light to as big as you want to be, consistency is the biggest point, and having the insight and the automation really helps. And I felt, and kind of to the point you just said, Jay, it does give you more time to actually be in the garden. And I know there's a lot of growers that do it just to give themselves time so they don't have to be in the garden. But I feel like, the grower's grower looks at that as, hey, well, no, I want to learn my plants more. I want to have the attention to detail, down to the angle of the drippers or my pot straining right, like just the nuances of everything that you otherwise wouldn't really have time to look at because you're holding a hose and watering a pot. And I don't knock it, like hand watering is huge, but I feel, like if you're really trying to learn, controlling as many variables as you can is the most important part of elevating your ability to even see what's going on. Because if you're having to tweak every single variable, or at least fix them, then it's tough to see that, and I feel like with full controlled environment agriculture, that's the whole point, is to try to have control of every variable to be able to make slight tweaks, just one or two. Obviously, it's very easy as growers to change 4 things at once and then never really see the real I guess value. But yeah, I mean, to me, that's the point. The is to be able to control as many variables as possible, to be constant, and then make slight tweaks, and see what that does. Like, I know recently we've been running, I guess over the past year and a half, we've been focusing heavily on EC in the substrate, and trying not to get too out of hand with it. We've tried pushing it, to the point where we're pinging the meters, over 30, and really trying to stack it to try to get the most yield without compromising quality. And I was talking to Cian a bit about it earlier when we were getting set up. It's like, I feel like there's not a one size fits all when it comes to things like substrate, EC, and even just irrigation strategy. I mean, depending on your setup, whether you have really high PPFD, you run hotter or cooler temperatures, or you're pushing a higher VPD or a lower VPD. Like, everybody's approach is different, and the biggest, I would say, limiting factor is the person's system. Like whether the HVAC can handle those set points, whether you can irrigate zone to zone. If your water temperatures are out of whack coming through to your batch tanks, like there's a lot of variables, and as growers, we all kind of have to learn those. So it's like there is a basic philosophy that I think can be deployed, but round after round, you end up learning your system a bit better. And currently, our system, our biggest limiting factor is the HVAC. And so we have to kind of maneuver our plant counts, and then be real particular with how much water we send to each room. Our PPFD, the highest that we can push given our lighting spacing, and then even Massachusetts limits grams per square foot, excuse me, watts per square foot, not grams per square foot. So like we're limited on how much light we can pack into a room, which also limits our ability to scream the PPFD. So again, it's a big equation, but all that to say that we've found that running our substrate EC no higher than 6 and even lower, we were talking to Cian and I were talking about it earlier. It's like anything that has gelato in it, any of the candy leaning phenos. Once we start pushing it over 6, you'll see burnt tips, you'll see lockout. But if we keep it between like 3 and 5, 5 when we're stacking, we end up getting a better result. And again, I know that's very subjective, but yeah, that's what we've been messing with a lot recently, and we've been having some really great results. Just keeping substrate EC a bit lower.
This is one of the reasons you're successful, man. Is like you are trying to move from what historically a lot of times has been anecdotal growing, right? Here's the things that work, and you pinpointed it as limiting the number of variables and then making those tweaks. Kind of funny. I was thinking about our buddy Jeff that was on the show the other day, and he was like, "Yeah, change 1% at a time." And it's like, well, I mean, 1% might not be enough to make a significant difference, but yeah, that philosophy is exactly right. And, one of the things that that also kind of hit me, I think, God, 2 or 3 years ago, we did an interview with you. We might have done this at Grower of the Month or something.
Yeah.
And you were like, well, Jason's kind of like a therapist, and it's like, yeah, I can't give you guys the blueprint, the roadmap. Like, I can't tell you exactly what's going to work, but if we can discuss the scientific reasoning that we understand, really break it down to a full understanding of what some of these behaviors are happening because of, you guys, you can apply growing knowledge, you can apply everything that you're seeing on site and make the right decisions. So
sure.
I
even
love that attitude.
No, for sure. And like, I feel, there's a few people out there that have been really emphasizing nutritional steering and trying to focus on, your ratio of minor elements to your macro elements and your mobile and immobile nutrients. And I've been fascinated by it all. But what I found is that there's not really many peer-reviewed or collegiate level studies on fertility for cannabis outside of the vegetative state. Like there's a lot of nurseries out in California that have good research that shows like these are the percentages of each element that you want in the tissue, and this is the ppm targets that you want in your fertility to be able to run a nursery and grow your moms to peak health. But a big reason why you don't see a ton of research on fertility from day one of flower to how many weeks you run, is because you have buds, like what labs, and there's a few allegedly, labs that are willing to take buds to send into the lab to test, the percentage of your elements in the tissue of the leaf as well as the bud, so you can try to understand how your elements are moving throughout the plant throughout the whole life cycle. And it's just because of the laws and restrictions, it's hard to find real good research throughout the flowering cycle. And that's something that luckily we've been trying to dive into here, is like building custom fertilizer profiles and working with a few mixers just to really try to tweak elements in our inputs to not only encourage great plant health, but to encourage, better curing, better smoke, shelf stability, things of that nature that people think about in other crops. But now we're at this point in time where we're able to work with people who are also helping us learn more about the nuance of fertility and the real difference, not just on the vegetative side, which again is very, very important. If you don't have good clones, good veg plants, then you're starting off wrong. But it's been something that I know me and a couple of other cultivators on my team are really trying to nerd out on, is what is going to do the best for us throughout the flowering cycle. And there's a lot of fertility companies out there that are just saying one part and slightly tweak EC here and there, but we're trying to do a deeper dive to really understand what is the best. And right now, it's kind of a combination of things. We haven't really landed on it, but to the point you were talking about in regard to research, it takes time. It takes 3 months for us to understand how well this batch of fertilizer did. And so far we're trending in the right direction. We've had some hiccups, but and then you will make slight tweaks again, but it takes, 3 to 6 months to get real data. And even then that's kind of not enough time to really make, changes with conviction. But yeah, that's been something fun recently outside of irrigation and environmental steering, like trying to tap into the nutritional steering. But it does kind of all play a part with your environment, like how much is your environment affecting everything, and then you kind of have to dial your process relative to your growing
Yeah,
conditions.
and kind of like what you said earlier too. I mean, your limiting factor is your HVAC and how hard you can steer your environment. So you're always going to
Hmm.
have to kind of curate what you're doing with those rooms and what your strategy is going to look like based on that.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's typically, I would guess every grower would agree with me that that's typically the biggest limiting factor is your HVAC system. And do you have any redundancy? Do you have the capacity
And
needed?
if
And
it's
then
not,
even,
man, good for you.
yeah, right. And it's just not cheap. Once you get to scale, it costs millions of dollars to put in new mechanical systems, and then with building redundancy and in the market these days with prices going the opposite direction that I know almost every farmer would want them to be going. You just have to be very conscious of that because um, yeah, hopefully it'll flatten out and then quality will come back. But even the economic pressures are tough for everybody right now. So people want value. So that's something we try to provide here is, a good genetics, quality product, very clean, and something that you can get a good amount of for the price. And that's just kind of, I think we're not unique in mass in that regard. I think the whole country's kind of feeling that pressure in regard to pricing.
So I wanted to loop back a little around to your nutrient mixing and custom stuff, and so
Hmm.
just because I'm a very graphical person, and historically, thinking it's kind of interesting. In the last 5 years, we've seen a proliferation of ripening mixes, right? Where it's like, okay, well, we've got this ratio of nutrients in the system, and then towards the end, we're trying to manipulate that, right? And when we
Hmm.
do look at other crops, tomatoes is obviously one of the first ones we look at. There's some pretty cool charts out there that they actually have plotted out where they think that the ideal ratio should be throughout the duration, right? So, like we think about, all right, early on, right, we want to have high levels of nitrogen, and
Hmm.
over the course of it, we begin dropping it. And building out profiles like this for and then you get strain dependent as well. But building out profiles like this is a very complicated process.
Hmm.
One because, like you said, lab wise, we don't have a lot of great ways to identify what this uptake needs are from the plant, other than visual plant development, bud development type of response. And to make things even more complex, right here, I've just got nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. These are just our major nutrients. These are our macros, right? And obviously, just even starting with your macros can make a huge difference in your grow. What we've seen with the ability to drop nitrogen levels, and
Hmm.
a lot of these 2-part salts. I help people kind of work with tweaking what their actual A to B ratios are. Like sometimes,
Hmm.
sometimes we'll just start dropping out base towards the end, depending on what nutrient supplier they're using. Um,
Hmm.
and then, like you said, let's start getting into micros. We could have a dozen lines on here of plant metabolized chemicals that are affecting our total outcome. So, props to you for digging into that. This definitely not something for the faint of heart.
No, and again, that's something I'm grateful that Harbor House allows us to do it. And we really try to have like a continuous improvement culture here. And there's a baseline that I will always operate from just to ensure we don't have total crop loss. But we do make tweaks. to our fertility program, and we'll make bases, and we typically have to order a ton or two at a time when we're getting custom blends, and then we have all of our minor elements here. And again, the front end of that is tough too, just to make sure that, okay, we know what our EC target is in solution. We'll mix our stock tanks, titrate our stock tanks to make sure that our stock tanks are mixed to the proper concentration, and then we'll we'll calibrate our dosers to ensure that we're pulling the correct EC from that. So it doesn't start with just hoping it works, right? You have to verify at each step to ensure that the calculator that we use, the proper ppm, is within an acceptable deviation of like 1 to 2%. We want to make sure that we're hitting those targets, and then as it gets to the room, we're collecting there and then taking tissue throughout the life cycle just to verify um, that we're hitting our targets, in regard to mobile and immobile nutrients. Like that's one for me that I think is going to really change the game on how the secondary metabolites are produced, the smoke, terpenes, like everything. I think focusing heavy on the ripening side, but making sure that you're not overdoing immobile nutrients and becoming toxic at the wrong time, which will create antagonistic effects in the whole plan, and then you just lock out on things that you don't want, and it becomes a bigger problem. So like keeping it simple is nice always, but I also like trying to find the limits of certain things to see what we can do and see how we can make it better.
It's a fine balance because with most any system, the more complicated it gets, the more likely you're going to have some type of catastrophic failure.
Yeah.
But obviously, you have to have some complexity to stay competitive.
For sure.
We're very, very simple, then we can't compete. And so, like I said, it's one of those things that when I started working at AROYA, it was refreshing that I love being in the garden, but it was refreshing that I wasn't staying up late at night checking to make sure that my new programming on the greenhouses was going to work all night, and we weren't going to just nuke things out. And it's like, all right, well, when we get in there, it was stupid simple. Like, we had a grower that'd go in there and open vents and close vents and stuff, and it's like, well, that's not necessarily sustainable. It's not as repeatable. But if we introduce the complexity of programming these set points based on temperatures and humidities, well, now our sensor needs to work right, and all of that stuff has to occur, and we need some type of redundant system to check that this added complexity is going to function. Because even if I am the redundant system, right, I might fail at some point too. So it's like, how do we get this full feedback loop to really get us to the next step? So yeah, really, really cool that you guys are sending out leaf tissue samples throughout the round in order to kind of analyze whether those targets are achieved or not.
For sure.
It's also like, how are you going to tell whether or not those results are what you were really looking for and what you were shooting for if you're not taking those leaf samples and you're not collecting that data the whole way through? So, it goes to show you're not just trying to iterate new ways of doing things. You're also tracking and trying to, take an honest accounting of what works and what doesn't, so you guys can keep employing that from a, substantiated numerical perspective rather than just throwing the dart at the wall and hoping she works.
For sure. And again, I think, focusing on your inputs in this market, and then just in general, it's smart business practice. Because of the price, right now it's getting very competitive, and if you're not looking at things like that, to me, I think it's a bit of an oversight. But
What are the
again,
prices like these days out in Mass?
the last report the CCC put out, excuse me, the price per gram was $3.31, which was down. It's the lowest it's ever been. I actually have it pulled up right here. The last report from March, the month prior, is at $4.28. So it dropped almost a full dollar in a month. Some would say it might be the 420 sales that happened in August or April, but we don't know, because even the April prior, it didn't drop like that. There's unfortunately been some bigger companies that have shut down. I guess fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it. But like, there's a lot of people who've lost their jobs, and because of the prices are dropping. And Massachusetts once was a great market for people to be a first mover in, but now it's kind of, who's consistently putting out quality product that tests well and has a good reputation. Like those are the people that can stand the test of time. But yeah, there's been a flood of product hitting the market just because of some big MSOs have shut their doors, and they always have a different reason of doing it. I'm not exactly sure why, but yeah, it's hurting the state price. That's for sure. Just because there's so much product now hitting the market, and they're just trying to recover whatever money they can. And again, kind of the economic pressures, like it's a tough time in the country for a lot of the working class to make ends meet, and they just, everybody wants to still smoke weed. That's the value of a vice product in any time climate. And weed will always sell, but I think right now the consumer's asking mainly for the most for the least, and I understand. It's tough because I always, I'll ever ask I will never ask what's the most potent weed, and what's the cheapest. I want to know what are the genetics. Is it grown well? Does it smoke well? Like those are the kind of targets that I look for. But I feel the volume consumer, a majority of the consumers these days, they're not asking that.
Well,
In
it's
time they
tough. I
will,
mean,
but
like if any of us go into a dispo today, I mean, our questions are going to be like looking at the people like, what's your favorite in here?
hmm
What makes you happy when you smoke it?
hmm
And unfortunately, that's not necessarily the the question that the majority of consumers are going into the dispo asking the tenders these days. So,
no,
we do have to play to people's preferences to some degree in that regard. And unfortunately, with the price compression, it definitely makes things a lot more competitive to be able to bring, really fire strains that are different to the market and be able to actually get those sold. But
true.
at the same time, it does, I think, in some ways open the door for some of these brands that have been putting out really solid, really consistent product over and over again for years. Because one thing I am seeing is that even if their people aren't particularly brand loyal, a lot of people will develop taste preferences that don't seem to go all over the map necessarily. They'll buy in a lane pretty consistently over and over
Yeah.
again.
hmm
And if you can meet their consistency needs, I mean that 9 times out of 10 will get you a repeat customer.
For
And
sure.
how do you think you guys have been dealing with that? I mean, I know you guys have a handful of selected strains that you guys try to run on a consistent basis. Is that part of that kind of that philosophy?
Yeah, yeah, like we have a few that are our tried and true, like Albarino's one. Shout out to our guys at Firefly Organics in Maine. Melting Pot Farms, they're the ones. Melting Pot's the one who bred it, and then Firefly is the one who blessed us with that cut. And yeah, I mean, we have a stable of genetics like our Albarino, Kosher Kush. It's also from the Firefly guys, the Motor Breath cut from them. And then I brought in some of the Aspen OG, our Coal Creek Kush, which is a cut that I used to run a lot out west, the Sour Tangy. And then we're bringing in the Chem 91 and some Chem D just to try to get some of the gassier notes onto the menu. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely something we try to do is just offer consistent varieties that people can become a bit more loyal to, and we found that. But even then, the loyalty thing is tough on some people. Like I feel a lot of people are loyal to potency, so we do have customers that always shop here and they always want the kosher, they always want the aspirin, or they always want the albarino, and that's what they'll always want regardless of potency or pricing. But that is a part of the current uh, market. It's like there's little loyalty to certain brands, and they're loyal to the potency, right? It doesn't matter. They'll walk into any shop and say, "Well, what's the most potent?" Like, okay. And again, and I think whether it's from economic pressure or just the being a new industry, and I say that, we've been doing it for 15 years. There's a lot of education that still needs to be done for the consumer. For example, like if you compare it to wine or beer, in order when you walk into a liquor store, just like whether it's a package, a bag store, or just like a standard liquor store. You're not asking the guy behind the counter, like, what's your favorite? Like you'll go to a winery or a brewery or a distillery and then talk to the people who obviously have a passion that you can engage in. And I think, there's certain states that are creating settings like that. California is trying to do consumption lounges, and sure there's a couple other that I'm forgetting, but I think that's also another opportunity in this industry for growth, is to create a regulation or at least setting to where you can talk to the people behind the bar or the person brewing it or the grower, and engage with them to try to learn the process. And I feel like a lot of dispensaries that have been popping up, they're designed to get the customer in and out, and I don't think that's a bad thing. Like, people are excited. I'm still stoked that you can go to a store and buy weed. Like, I think that's a huge hurdle. But I think an opportunity, which takes time and regulation and legislation and all that jazz, is just creating a space where you're not trying to rush that customer out. In fact, you want them to stay, to ask questions, to ask, well, what's the best way to smoke it? What's the best way to roll it? Like, how do you cure? What are you feeding? Like, what's your ideal environments? And just kind of learn the process. But that setting doesn't exist everywhere yet. And I think that's again, an opportunity. I don't want to say it's a bad thing, but there's opportunity for this industry to kind of level up once we create those spaces that will allow the customer to be engaged, and not feel like they're being rushed out because there's another customer behind you and we need to make the money. Like, again, that's all important, but I think that's also a opportunity for us to get better, to help encourage the customer, because no one was drinking IPAs 30 or 40 years ago, at least across the country. I'm sure the people who were brewing them were sharing them with their buddies and stuff, but it wasn't on the store. And it's like, but once breweries started popping up, and people growing at home, or brewing at home, kind of opened a different avenue for the consumer. Whether it's just because it's now cool or what, to me, I just think it's an awesome space to be able to teach somebody the nuances of the process and why it's better or not. But even going into Coors Brewery, it's fascinating. If you like
Oh
engineering
yeah.
and seeing all the technology, like, that stuff is awesome.
Oh man, you
But
ever get a chance, go take a tour of the Jose Cuervo distillery down in Mexico. One of the
yeah.
coolest tours I've ever taken in my life.
Hmm.
Um, so, I totally understand that, and I am on board with that idea. Honestly, if we could get more consumption lounges scattered around the country for people to start being able to have more personalized experiences, I think it would potentially open up some of those, you know, let's call them like flavor preferences that people don't necessarily know about yet. Because,
Yeah.
like you
Yeah.
said, before IPA hit the scene, a lot of people out there were potential IPA customers, probably would end up loving them. They just never knew it was an option yet.
Exactly.
And so I think that there's a road to travel yet in our industry where, we, whether that's consumption lounges, whether that's, I've heard someone mention the Johnny Appleseed model, where essentially you grow out like a small little batch of something that you're excited about, your passion project, and essentially just expect to not make a whole lot of money back on that, but be able to spread the flavors around a little bit so that you're giving people an opportunity to create a taste preference in those ways that, handing someone an IPA for the first time when they hadn't had one before, opening
Yeah.
up their flavor profile a little bit.
Yeah, I think a lot of it still is, there's a lot of us that want to create those spaces, but the red tape around the legality and in social consumption, or things like that, there's still some hurdles that need to be jumped. But I think in time it will, as long as we use sensible regulation and understanding of what's going on.
I
Um,
think so too, man. In the meantime, I might still keep handing out a couple of, fun, odd flavors, green packs to people every once in a while, and see if I can get some good reviews just to mix up the available flavors in the marketplace. You know what I mean?
yeah, no, kind of to build on that. One thing that, I'm from the East Coast originally, born and raised in Virginia, but um, green weed still has a place in the East Coast market. I spent some time out in California, and everybody wanted candies, and there's killer OGs out in California, and there were times when you couldn't sell a pound of OG for over $1,000. I have been told by some people out there that OGs are kind of demanding a higher ticket these days out west. But it's just nice being on the East Coast where we can still grow, OGs and sours, and people are willing to pay for them and not just say, no, I want it purple and I want it. Does it have gelato or not? And again, I'm not. I love all good weed. If it's good, and obviously that's all subjective too. But like if it's good, yeah, sure. I'm not going to hate on it. But I certainly have an affinity for green weed. Yeah, we were actually Cian and I were talking earlier, like one of my favorite genetics, I would say even to this day, is the flow out of Colorado. When I was out there in 2010 and 11, there were a couple cuts floating around, and there was like a purple flow and a green flow. And here I am talking shit on purple weed, but I love that flow, and it's such a unique genetic, and may not fit commercial production models, because it's a little bushier, just squattier plant. Definitely a pain on post processing, but it's amazing weed. And I feel like in order to get those sort of genetics to the people who care, or the piece of the pie that I would consider connoisseurs, you need to create space to educate. And, they're harder to grow, so they should demand a bit higher ticket, similar to wine or beers that are smaller batch or tougher to produce. Like the price kind of is reflected on, the process, and not necessarily the hype, because then you could go out there and there's a lot of super hype varieties that are super expensive, but that doesn't mean, Blue Dream at one time yielded a ton of, excuse me, yielded a high ticket, but it also yielded a ton of weed. And I think that kind of died real quick. But that's what I'm trying to say, is I think there's a lot of varieties out there that have kind of fallen to the wayside because they don't fit modern production models for commercial production, and they not only put strain on the system and the grow, but downstream. And I think some of those genetics are some of the most special, and difficult to grow. But hopefully those are never lost, and we'll be able to create a space where we can
Honestly, I
continue
think
to grow
that's one of
those.
the great tragedies of our industry these days, is the like narrowing and homogenization of the gene pool that we're working with across the
Hmm.
country these days.
Hmm.
And I mean,
Excuse me.
there's only so many ways you can cross and back cross, gelatos into themselves before you've just,
Bottlenecked.
yeah, bottlenecked the genetic, and there's not really a whole lot of anywhere for it to go until you start introducing new diversity into that genetic lineage. And I mean, if we keep breeding out and selecting for things that are only able to finish in a 63-day window, as much as I'm fond of a commercial 63-day flower window, if we leave by the wayside a lot of the varietals that take, let's say, 68 or 72 days to finish out, that is going to narrow our genetic lineage availability in our industry quite a bit. And as time goes on, I think that, if the only things people are crossing are, candies, well, that's going to mean that our available genetics really are limited to what's been
Sure.
kept around in that particular varietal.
And I think it
So I
kind of
think,
that
yeah,
ties into our education, though, right? Like as long as
yep,
we let people know what it is, and the lineage isn't just 40 different names, it's actually like indicative of high mountain Afghani, or Paki, or from Africa, or Burma. Like there's lots of areas of the world, that have native landrace varieties, and I think education is going to be one of the most important parts of that for the consumer to want to ask for it. I mean, I was excited. There's a group of dudes down in, Virginia, that are only growing 12-week plus varieties, and it's a very small batch approach. They're not blowing it out, one, because of Virginia's laws, but there's yeah, they're putting a brand out there that's only long flowering varieties, and they're going to play to a certain customer, but to me, I think, you know it's important to do things like that, to help educate the customer. Like I think, and also to your point, genetic diversity. If the customer demands it, um, it's only going to encourage, something that's going to keep the gene pool diverse, and less bottlenecked with everything that we're starting to see now. So yeah, I don't know, man. I think genetics are also, that's what keeps it exciting for me. It's like it's there's so much to still discover. And, where there's companies mapping genomes and trying to understand what's going on, and setting markers. And these are all fun ways to breed quicker, and not have to rely on time. But I think there's still the intangible part of a cultivator who has an attention to detail that's hard to kind of replicate through a series of numbers. Numbers are very important, but I think that's what's exciting for me, at least in cannabis, is being able to discern what's good or bad through my own experience. And I think every cultivator can agree with that, because there's no, what I like doesn't mean it's what you're going to like, but I think better and good and bad is all relative to what you've experienced in life. And um, if I say it's good, it doesn't mean you're going to like it, but hopefully, hopefully I'm holding a standard as a cultivator that I can stand behind what I'm putting out, and be happy about the product regardless. Maybe that was a bit of a tangent. My bad.
I'm pretty sure there's a lot of customers out there that are happy with your product. So.
But I think it's interesting that you're talking about how there's some places out there that are kind of breaking the mold a little bit and chasing a different approach. You know what I mean? Because I think that's part of what it takes, is some people to be bold and to realize that, like, maybe opening up that 12-week only place, they might not be shooting for wild amounts of yield. They might not be shooting for the same types of varieties that we're seeing a lot of other places grow. And as a result, there is going to be a limitation to how big they can grow in the marketplace. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to run a successful business doing that. And I think that that's kind of the thing, right? If people are willing to take chances and go out there and try something a little different and run a business that is unique comparative to what else is out there in the marketplace, I think that's going to start opening the doors a little bit and help, bring people around to the idea that there is more diversity out there to be messed with, and that there's going to be a variety of different taste preferences that people might develop over time. Because, I mean, I personally do love those IPAs, but I've got some friends that won't drink anything but a stout. So
exactly. And there's something for everybody, and again, kind of like to what I was just saying, it's like, just because I like it doesn't mean another person will. But as long as it's done well and the process is done well and clean, and I think, again, there's a lot of opportunity for growth, and it's still a very young industry, even though it feels like it's been a lifetime. But it's fun, man. I can't complain at all. It's the problems we pray for. Heard that from a good friend of mine, and some people don't agree with what I just said, but it's like, I've loved weed for quite some time, and I get stoked every day being able to grow it and learn everything. There's a movie called The Gardener, and there was a saying in there. It's a quote that says, "Farming is belief in the future." That everything will go to plan. And it's like, it's true. I love it. And not everything goes to plan. And we learn a lot. But it's fun. Not everybody can say that about their job and what they do. Again, work is work, and there's always stress. I don't think that ever disappears, but it's fun working in this industry and being able to work, with you guys and other people who are in this space that are willing to think outside of the box and try to push the limits to see how we can change it, rather than, fitting a square into a square kind of thing.
It's kind of interesting. I've been, you guys are talking a lot, which is great. I've been just thinking about a lot of anecdotes over the years of different dispensaries that I've been in, and probably not even just over the years have they changed, but probably the biggest difference was locations. In some of I think it was like Big Sur. I've done some pretty cool, really relaxed, chill dispensaries, and then in some of the shadier spots, they're like pushing you through like cattle. It's like this loop, and if you want to go back to the beginning, you got to come back in to check things out. Up here, Washington side, they've always been pretty relaxed, a pretty low populous area, and not a huge risks.
There's actually, sorry.
Go ahead. Hit
I would say there's actually a dope spot. Shout out to Kyle. Heritage Hash. They're up in Ukiah, and they built out an experience. It's like a hashery, where you could go through, and it's like an open kitchen kind of style thing, and They produce a ton of amazing hash, and I think it's definitely a first of its kind. But not many people go to Ukiah. Ukiah is out there. It's some of the most beautiful country in our nation. But what he did, and he's busted his ass the whole time to get it where it's at. But I mean, I personally haven't even been there. I've just seen what they put out online, and it's something that I look forward to seeing, and encourage anybody and everybody to go check that out, because they do
Put
a
that on
very
my
cool
next
thing.
itinerary to travel up that direction.
Yeah, yeah.
See if I get
Heritage
around
hash.
there.
Yep.
Heritage hash, cool. One time I was fortunate enough to go to a wine museum, and it was 2 floors, and they had just immersive experience, and I learned way more about wine than I have in all the rest of my life combined.
Yeah.
They had different experiences where they had all the different smell notes on a table, and you could close your eyes, and you'd get that smell, and then you'd be like, oh well, that's a sweet smell, or that's a honey smell. And
Yeah.
one of them they've got an old leather shoe or old leather book inside of the thing, and it's like, oh yeah, that's the musky smell.
Hmm.
And that education is really important to also help people choose the right products that they want, right? So
Exactly.
there's so
Yeah.
much of this where we're like, okay, cool, we got lucky, we bought so many different types that we got lucky, and we knew we liked this one, this one, this one, this one. But that education helps us understand why, and then it also helps us choose the next one.
Hmm.
And it's like, back in the days before I even drank much wine, it's like a red wine or a white wine. And it's like, okay, I want a sativa or an indica.
Well,
It's like,
exactly, and I think that's where we're at right now in the industry. Because even, at least to me as a cultivator, it's like sativa and indica, and those are more indicative to physical traits, not necessarily like psychoactive traits. Like I look at a plant that's tall and stretchy, like, yeah, it's growing like a sativa, but sometimes the high is very sedative. So it's like I think the industry's kind of laid that framework out to help the consumer. But I think when we create these spaces for education, like a winery or a distillery or a brewery, like there's going to be a different angle used when we try to discuss, cannabis in more detail, and just create a space that can be done like that winery you just had an experience at, Jason.
Yeah, and I think, what is it? Is it BSD Analytics that does quite a bit of terpene profile libraries, where they try to kind of,
Maybe.
I don't know, so many companies that flop around in my
I know
head.
there's abstracts. The dude Max has been doing a lot of work with trying to isolate terpenes, but also new smells. Miyabi, Riley, these 2 other doctors, scientists that are in the space, really trying to figure out and broaden the understanding. Which, again, as it gets more legal and more widely accepted, that's where money can be put in the right place to further our understanding. And right now, I think there's still just, unfortunately, some red tape that limits that. And again, there's a lot of risk takers willing to push the limit. I think we all are a part of that group, but I think, yeah, there's a lot of things that need to change in the federal level. When, again, I don't want the federal arm in it any more than it already is. But let us create some cool spaces to be able to educate the consumer. I think it's important for the safety and even just the experience itself.
I think it'll come around too. I mean, people forget, but if you think about where we are compared to where alcohol is, we're in the 10-year period of time right after Prohibition ended. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And there's not probably a ton of big changes that happened right after Prohibition ended in terms of how alcohol was being moved and how it was being talked about in terms of production in different parts of the country. But getting past that first 10 years, that's where a lot of the people who were learning, how to run these businesses cut their teeth and figured out what was working and how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a feeling that the next decade of cannabis industry is going to be where we see a lot of interesting things start to happen that have been kind of gate kept from us a little bit as this industry has been in its infancy. So I'm
For sure.
really, really hopeful that the next few years we start to see some of those legislative changes that allow for things like, the winery model or, consumption lounge model to take root a little bit more, and
Yeah.
for that educational process to begin in earnest.
Totally. And I to kind of tap onto that, it's like I think logistics is a big part of the whole industry. And flour has a shelf life. A lot of people will say, oh, and again, this is preference and somewhat controversial, but it's like, curing your weed's important. But when you cure weed for a year, it's going to brown out. There isn't, at least to my knowledge, outside of like nitrogen packing, there hasn't been anybody who's created a process that at room temperature, you can keep jarring a weed for a year and have it look exactly as it did going in. And with wine, you have cellars, right, that are very constant, but it's a liquid that almost gets better in time. And again, who am I to tell somebody that brown weed is good or bad? Maybe they want it cured that long, and if it's brown and it has these, all these other converted cannabinoids, it may give you a different experience. And we may be talking about how in a year this is what we want to smoke. I mean, me personally, I don't. I'd rather smoke something that's been off the plant, 2 3 months max. Obviously, you still need to have good intent with your processes of drying and curing to remain the grease or retain the grease and everything. But I think that's another thing. Hash is something I think will fit the wine model well, just because it can age without extreme degradation, and certainly when you go to packaging it and how you store it. But flour, it's a different thing, and I think it hopefully I'm proved wrong. Hopefully there's people who can have these processes that will age cannabis perfectly over time, and it can only get better in time. But I've just found on a personal level, like when you hold weed for too long, even if it's stored in a nitrogen pack, like I've had bad experiences where I think there's that sweet spot for flour. Hash is a different beast. If you're making liquid, drinks or something like that, again, different beast. But flour, in my opinion, has a window of where it's going to be what you want. And again, everybody's preference is different. So if you like stuff that's a year old and brown, again, I'm not going to tell you it's bad, but I think for me personally, there's a fine window for flour, and it makes it tough, because with wine or even liquors, you're saying, well, this is from year 98, and that was the best year. And it's like, well, we're growing indoor, so indoor is a little different. Now, if we were just doing outdoor farms and we harvested year after year, different batches, and, your 98 year was great, it's like, well, how can I store that flour so that it is preserved in a way that I want it to look the same way it did in 98? I think there's an
Space weed,
opportunity.
bro.
Yeah, I know. There's an
fun.
opportunity to learn that, but I haven't found it out yet. I've definitely, I mean, a freezer. You can store wheat differently to preserve its color. Um, but I would love to be able to walk into a cave of weed one day, and it's just my cellar, and I have dope ass weed that's been there for years, and I can open jars up to show my friends,
And
and
you
it's
find
like,
someone who's able to put a stopper in that whole oxidation thing,
yeah.
call
I
me,
mean,
because I
yeah,
am
ethylene
on
gas.
board. I'll
Yeah,
build a cellar
exactly.
too.
Like that's a dream one day, is to have a cellar, not of just wine and other awesome substances, but cannabis. Um, that's the dream.
So
Yes.
I was being serious. There's a product out there called Space Weed, and they flash freeze dry it.
Okay.
And it reminds me, like, it's definitely a different product than what you're used to from flour. It kind of reminds me of
Well,
like those ice cream bars that you get from REI, and like a little,
yeah.
like yeah,
Okay.
it's
I
crazy.
get you.
I don't know
And
how
it
long that stuff
definitely,
lasts like that, but
it retains its flour, like its structure. Like I've
uh,
freeze dried lots of wheat, and again, there's still a balance on that. Like you could over dry it, but what I've noticed the biggest, I guess what I've noticed most, um, it stands out the most, is that the flour doesn't deflate. Like it keeps the structure that it had on the plant. Um,
What's the texture like when you snap that nug open?
Well, again, if you over dried it, if you over freeze dried it, it's going to be too dry. Like there's a
I'm just
fine
imagining
line.
like snapping the freeze dried ice cream sandwich.
Yeah,
That like styrofoam kind of texture.
yeah. And see, I think there's a balance. You can overdo it, but there's also, depending on the genetic intensity, like there's a fine line of doing it just right. But again, I don't know, Jay. Like I don't know if it would stand the test of time. We would see. I'm willing to buy an eighth and park it for a little bit just for research and development purposes. But I know there's people trying to do the cryo approach or the freeze dry approach, and I'm all for it because it'll help mitigate microbials. It'll help a lot of things. But I'm not sure if it's going to prevent it from degrading because oxidation's oxidation and time's not on your side when it goes through that process.
Well, you freeze dry a couple of nugs, and next time Jason and I will come out, we'll all three break them apart and we'll render a verdict.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Well, I know we said we weren't going to keep you the full hour, Cory, but here we are, just right past an hour. So I probably ought to bring us on home for the day. Everyone who's tuned in, thank you guys for joining us for episode 144 of AROYA Office Hours. We'll see y'all again next week on episode 145. As always, welcome cultivation questions. Drop them anytime in the AROYA application. Email us at sales@aroya.io. DM us via Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn. We want to hear from you and answer any of your cultivation questions you guys got burning. Smash the like button. Leave us a review on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, or wherever you listen to the podcast. We appreciate your feedback. And Cory, thank you for hopping on today, bud. It's been a great time
pleasure,
talking.
fellas. We'll talk soon.
That we will.
All right, take care.
See you guys on episode 145.
Yeah.